really thank Carl Gershwin for his work in putting together this conference. When I arrived this morning, I was worried about jet lag, but it seemed as the day went on, and I heard the panels, and I heard the commitment of people here in this room, I got energized, and I'm ready to go. But I really want to express my appreciation to Carl. Not only is I consider Carl a good friend of mine, but I want to just thank him because Carl has been consistent all his adult life, and every day when he wakes up, he's out there promoting democracy all around the world. Carl, we thank you very much for everything that you do. And I want to say this is a very personal honor for me to share this program with Kailash. He's a hero. He's a hero not just of mine and folks in this room, but around the world. Kailash is a hero of the labor movement and the democracy movement. And Kailash, we thank you and appreciate all the work that you have done and all the work that you continue to do in the name of justice and democracy. Thank you, Kailash, for everything that you do. The year was 1963 when the children of Birmingham, Alabama, they were attacked by police dogs as they marched through the streets of Birmingham to demand desegregation of public facilities. And it was those children that inspired the movement for civil rights in the United States. Then in 1998, children all over the world began a global march against child labor, trafficking, and exploitation, a march that continues today under Kailash's leadership to inspire a movement for global justice. Inspired by the courage of those children in Birmingham, Alabama, 50 years ago this month, Dr. Martin Luther King led a group of civil rights protesters on a freedom march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, where they were attacked, they were beaten by police. The televised images shocked America, and it galvanized the movement to give African Americans in the United States the right to vote. In his speech just 2 weeks ago in Selma, President Obama said that the Americans who crossed this bridge, they were not just physically imposing, but they gave courage to millions. They held no elected office, but their courage is what led a nation. They marched as Americans who had endured hundreds of years of brutal violence, countless daily indignities, but they didn't seek special treatment. They just wanted the equal treatment promised to them almost a century before they marched. And Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolent resistance that was so effective had its roots right here in India, in the teachings of Gandhi. And the bridge between Dr. King and Gandhi was created by a man who Carl spoke of named Bayard Rustin. And I heard Carl describing Rustin earlier as our George Fernandes in the United States. And I think that that description is very accurate. But Bayard Rustin was a leading civil rights organizer who traveled to India in 1948 to study Gandhi's movement. And Rustin went back and he later educated Dr. King on the teachings and the work of Gandhi. And Rustin was also the organizer of the 1963 March on Washington. and later founded the A. Philip Randolph Institute, named for the famous labor and civil rights leader, which I am privileged to be a part of today. So our countries and our people are connected by a common philosophy and a common history of resistance to oppression. And what I want to focus on just briefly this evening is the specific role that organized labor, trade unions are playing in this fight for equality and inclusion. You see, we've been marching together, labor, civil rights, for a long time. And we find ourselves, we have to continue marching. But as we discussed in one of the panels earlier, we also have to focus on the institutions and the mechanisms that build inclusion and trust in societies. You know, today in the United States and around the world, social cohesion is threatened by rising inequality and economic and social marginalization of large segments of the population. The breakdown of institutions such as labor unions that promote equality and opportunity and participation creates not only a skewed distribution of resources, but also a breakdown of trust. At first impression, it seems pretty obvious. As economic institutions, through collective bargaining and advocating social welfare policies, unions help to share the wealth of society in a more equitable manner. And as political institutions, unions can promote inclusion both internally through democratic participation and leadership elections and contract negotiations, and externally through mobilization of our members in political campaigns. Indeed, where else can a factory worker or an office worker learn the skills of running for office, negotiating a collective bargain agreement, and advocating for legislative reforms? Yet, somehow in newspapers around the world and editorial pages, the notion is perpetuated that trade unions are the enemies of the poor, as if the economy was a zero-sum game with only poor workers and better off workers, or workers in developed and developing countries competing for finite resources. Well, let's disevolve ourselves to that notion. You see, in fact, the trade union movement has provided critical support both at home and abroad to movements for democracy and equality. In Selma, we marched for the right to vote, and we see today, as Shawna alluded to, we're seeing in America an unprecedented campaign is underway to deny millions of citizens that very right, that very franchise, to have a voice in their democracy by working to take away their votes. They're imposing onerous registration and identification requirements. They're limiting voting hours, denying the vote to persons with criminal convictions, even for misdemeanors and petty crimes. And they're dismantling the legal protections against discrimination. These measures disproportionately affect minorities, the young, and senior citizens. But the labor movement and our allies were fighting back against this campaign of political exclusion. We're using the courts and mobilizing our members to defend the voting rights of every citizen. Because in Selma, we marched for the right to decent jobs. And today in America, millions of workers in marginal, low-wage, part-time jobs are denied the basic protections of labor law: fair wages and hours, safe workplaces, secure retirement. Many are undocumented immigrants forced to work in the shadows for fear of deportation, or so-called guest workers who are tied to their employers. And others are citizens, some from impoverished backgrounds, but increasingly those who have fallen out of the middle class as a result of globalization and so-called free trade agreements. Organized labor is using several innovative strategies to defend the rights of these marginalized workers. We're running campaigns to raise the minimum wage at the state and local level. We're putting pressure on Walmart, McDonald's, and other low-wage employers that receive huge taxpayer subsidies. And we're working to pass comprehensive immigration reform are all issues driven by the unions in alliance with networks of local grassroots NGOs. You know, these campaigns that organized labor are involved in are not limited to domestic issues. Together with the Solidarity Center and other global partners, American unions are helping workers around the world organize to defend their rights, including child labor, domestic workers, bonded labor, and others, often in coalition with outstanding partners like Kailash. I spoke earlier about our work in Liberia. We work with rubber tappers at Firestone, helping them form an independent union, negotiate contracts. We abolished child labor, working with our Liberian partners on that plantation, and strengthen the national labor movement in a war-torn nation with few solid democratic institutions. You know, there was an old civil rights activist in America named Fannie Lou Hamer. And Fannie Lou Hamer, she traveled all through the South and met in black churches with black folks who historically have not had the right to vote in the early 60s. And her message was simple, but it was direct. Fannie Lou Hamer looked at black folks in the eye and she asked them a fundamental question. When are you going to be sick and tired of being sick and tired? Fundamental question that moved the consciousness of a people to stand up, stick their chests out, hold their heads up, and refuse to accept the degradation of the type of life that they was being offered in America. An injury to one is indeed an injury to all. And that's why we march, brothers and sisters. Be it Gandhi's march, Mandela's march, Dr. King's march, Kailash's march. It's a global march. It's a march for equality, justice, inclusion, a march for all working people and those that truly believe in democracy. And brothers and sisters, I am proud to march with you until our children realize that we're going to leave them a better world than the one that we inherited. That's our mission, that's our goal, and together we can create a global world that our children will be proud to say that my parents and our elders stood up for us so that we can realize our dreams and aspirations. Thank you very much.
So we're going to open for discussion. I'm going to ask the first question because I can feel from both of these presentations, I feel the march in me. I can feel it. It's there. And I can see it in this room. And so the first question I want to ask you both, I want to channel several women in this room today who stood up and asked questions about gender equality. And I remember in the morning panel, a woman, I'm sorry I didn't get your name, asked His Holiness a question about India. And she said, you know, how is it that in a democracy like this, where we've made so much progress on inclusion and rights, that we still have violence against women and we still have a lack of gender equality? And I heard 4 or 5 other people ask similar questions at every single panel today. And so I want to ask, as part of our march for dignity and democracy and inclusion and rights, I want to ask Fred and Kailash to just say something about how the movements you've been involved in address gender inequality and fight for justice for women.
Well, almost 60% of illiterate people on this planet are women and girls. So we deny their participation in many things. We cannot think of an inclusive society if so many women and girls are denied the very fundamental right of learning, of education. Secondly, sometimes the social discrimination and social taboos and mindset are equally responsible to link with illiteracy of women and denial of their right to equality in family, in society, in property, anywhere. And that is, again, a serious question. Unfortunately, the trafficking of women and girls has been growing in the world. Earlier, trafficking of human beings was the 3rd most lucrative illicit trade in the world after small firearms and drugs. Now it has surpassed. Earlier it was about $45–50 billion industry. Now it has grown $150 billion. So that's global scenario. In India, in South Asia, of course in whole Asia, it's a serious problem, intra-border and inter-border trafficking both. So this is a big challenge, that how to address this, and how to control the mafia who is involved in it. And a lot of black money which is generated out of sale and buying of girls and women, children in general, goes as black money, and that black money is used for corruption, and then it fuels further corruption and some sort of denial of human rights and dignity in their lives. So sometimes politicians are corrupted, the police agencies, border agencies are corrupted out of that money because huge black money is generated. So that's also a big question. I think that beside the legal and social efforts, equally important that the faith leaders should strongly come up in favor of women. They have such a deep and broad outreach, and millions of people listen to them through television, through channels and media and so on. But you can hardly see that the faith leaders in Hinduism, Islam, and Christianity, Buddhism are strongly speaking every day. Every day, I would say. It is not once in a while somebody says that the women are so important in our religion. Every day they must talk that we will not tolerate any kind of injustice, inequality, and atrocities, abuse against women and girls. Perhaps it will help in raising the voice for them. But of course, when it comes to the democratic elections, you can see a very tiny segment of women who are representing in the parliament, also in our parliament in India and most of the parliaments in Asia. You can hardly see, especially in South Asia, the proportionate women representation. So more efforts have to be done, and it is very necessary. And also, we have one little battle in India. Indian government agreed that 33% of the senior police officers post would be given to women. My organization in India has been fighting for it because we could not control many of the sexual abuses case, child trafficking case through the male members. If the girls are facing problems, that there is no girl-friendly investigation system by the male police. And the girls and women don't really trust the male police. So Government of India had made a decision recently that 1/3 of the senior police officers would be appointed as women and girls. So that's very good. So these kind of measures work.
Thank you. And Fred, I mentioned India, but in the United States, 1 in 3 women are victims of violence at the hands of men over the course of their lifetime. Women make still more than 20 cents less than men on the dollar, and we have less women elected in our Congress than almost any other democracy in the world. How does gender equality play into the civil and labor rights movement in America?
Well, first, Shawna, I think we just have to take a brief look from a historical perspective. The Constitution of the United States was signed in 1787. There were 74 delegates to that founding convention. All of them was white male landowners. The first 10 amendments of the Constitution is called the Bill of Rights. And they not only excluded people of color, they excluded their wives. And it wasn't until 1920 in the United States where women worked and received the right to vote. Now, the statistic that you gave is astonishing because the fact of the matter is, Shawna is exactly right. A woman in the United States, despite the fact that 17%, there are 17% more women in the United States that receive college degrees than they are males. Women are increasingly becoming CEOs and heads of major corporations. We have women in leadership positions throughout the labor movement in the United States. But yet, women make 77 cents every dollar that a man makes. Now, the logical solution is we have to seek a political solution to this problem. We have to hold our elected officials accountable to ensure that women have the same economic justice that men have in the United States. And, look, women, we cannot, in the United States, we cannot have any sort of movement without social justice, without approaching the disparities between women and men. And I think an immediate step that we could do, we got this little election coming up in 2016, and maybe we'll elect a woman as president of the United States. So that's a good start, but but the issue of women inequality in the United States is an embarrassment.